big picture, what we're doing, it has been about changing the nature of how value moves. We think that over the next couple of decades, there are staggering possibilities in terms of how commerce can change, how society can change based upon a dramatic reduction in friction of payments. Now that's not going to happen overnight, and certainly it does take a grassroots movement. What I'd like to share with you over the next 20 plus minutes is really where some of the origins of Ripple has come from, as well as share with you a couple of announcements we're making today for the first time. Now to start off, I thought I would share, I joined Ripple 3.5 years ago, and I will say a big part of the reason I joined the company was really Chris Larson's vision. Chris Larson, the co-founder of Ripple, really from the earliest days has talked about this internet of value. And Chris has demonstrated a track record of seeing around corners. First with eLoan and really democratizing the lending industry using the internet. More recently with Prosper. But I think he would acknowledge Ripple is the biggest bet. I think it's the most profound effort and has the potential to have the biggest impact. But one of the things Chris has also emphasized from the earliest days of my joining Ripple is the idea that we have to be builders. You know, Silicon Valley, over the last 25 years that I've been here, loves to talk about disruption. Disruption is great catnip for the media, it's great catnip for investors, but at the end of the day, sometimes disruption is exactly what you don't need. When we think about building, when we think about working with the industry, it's something that has distinguished Ripple from the earliest days of its founding. It wasn't about how do we tear down governments and how do we replace fiat currency. It wasn't about replacing banks. It was about realizing that there's very good reasons why we have the infrastructure we have, but there's an opportunity to be a builder and to partner with the industry to really enable something that hasn't yet been seen. We believe we're at the dawn of another era of globalization. But when you step back and think about it, like this visual, like the missing wheels on this skateboard, something's missing. When you think about what globalization requires to truly enable globalization, it really is a three-legged piece. Much like fire that requires fuel, oxygen, I'm having trouble with this clicker, there we go, fuel, oxygen, and heat to bring that flame together. The same thing is true around globalization. There's three networks that we think have to come together to work interoperably. The first two are data interoperability. That's the internet. It's had a profound impact on globalization. The second is goods and shipping. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the third and missing piece in terms of interoperable networks is around money. Money today is not interoperable. All of us, if you're here at Swell, it's certainly something that you know well. Now, if we step back and look at how we got here in other interoperable areas, the goods industry, some of you might have wondered, there's a kind of mock-up of a container, a cargo container downstairs. Some of you may have noticed and thought, what's up with the cargo container? It's kind of odd to be placed there. When Ripple thinks about what we're building, we use a cargo container sometimes as a metaphor for the interoperability. The reason is, this is a visual in the early 1900s of what a shipping dock looked like. Now you think about the pain of enabling shipping when every port had a different infrastructure. Every package was packaged up differently. It made shipping incompatible. It wasn't interoperable. Now imagine taking that one of these packages and moving it onto a train. Everything was not interoperable. In the 50s, we invented something kind of mundane, the cargo container. This cargo container enabled interoperability between boats, trains, trucks, and over the next 2 decades, we saw a 700% increase in global commerce. This was the interoperability of different networks coming together to reduce friction and reduce cost in a very material way. Now, if you look at that on the data side, and I'll spend less time on the data side because I think people know it well, but it wasn't that long ago. I know there's some young people in the audience that are surprised when you talk about this, but it wasn't that long ago. We talked about, you put a postcard in the mail, you put a stamp on it, you had no idea when it got there, you had no idea actually if it got there. compared to today, the explosion of instant messaging in various forms, whether you're using Snapchat or all the different ones. The thing I'll point out is as the friction went down, there's been an explosion in the usage. So even 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, every time you sent an SMS text message, it cost 25 cents. And then it went down to 10 cents, and now it's virtually free. And if you look at the charts of usage of these types of messaging, it continues to grow exponentially because the friction keeps coming down. So imagine how that applies to the $1.6 trillion per year that we spend as a society for making money interoperable. There's tremendous friction. That friction is measured by time, it's measured by cost, and frankly, it's measured by error rates. So we think there's a tremendous opportunity to change the nature. The other thing I'll just comment on briefly, particularly having had President Clinton up here speaking, the segments of the population that are often taxed the most by the cost of that $1.6 trillion are those that can least afford it. And as we think about how we can reduce the friction and change the nature of payments, we think there's a lot of things we can unlock. Some of them, frankly, are rather science fiction-y, about the future of how an internet of value could really enable even an Internet of Things. Some of those devices on the Internet of Things will be economic actors. How do we think about passing not 50 cents, but fractions of a cent? How do we make that truly enabled through this Internet of Value? So how do we get there? Well, blockchain technologies certainly represent a major step forward and an opportunity. Now, I am one of the first to admit and acknowledge there is a lot of hype in the blockchain space. President Clinton also made a comment this morning talking about genomics and how there's been the $3 billion that kicked off an industry around genomics. And we haven't yet fully seen the results. I think we still are in the earliest days of blockchain technologies, both for payments and other industries. We see a lot of experimentation, but we haven't yet seen that many examples of it truly going in production. Ripple's unique in its ability to say we have real live use cases of real production flows. So by bringing these three pieces together, I think we truly can enable an Internet of Value. We can enable money to be interoperable in the same way goods, in the same way data, and to truly enable a bonfire to exist in enabling global commerce to accelerate, to enable the industries, and frankly, even a segment of the population to be brought into the fold. So let's build. Let's not think about just disruption. Let's work together. Let's build what that future looks like. Well, when Ripple had started 5 years ago, from the earliest days, our mission statement has been something pretty simple. The Internet of Value, enabling value to move the way information moves today. Now, I'll be honest, some of you watch the HBO series Silicon Valley. You see a headline like that, what the hell is he talking about? And frankly, when I go and talk to people in governments, I talk to financial institutions at a senior level, sometimes I talk about this Internet of Value, they don't really know what to do with me. But I'm talking about a more, frankly, slightly more mundane step towards that, which is really removing the mission we talk about in the shorter term, is to remove friction from global payments. This is the point at which there's the highest friction, the highest error rates, and the slowest experience. So I think one of the reasons why Ripple has been successful is because we've been very focused on one use case. There's a lot of things going on in the blockchain world, and there's companies that I think, to make fun of myself a little bit, have their own peanut butter problem. They've spread themselves very thin. They're working on lots of different initiatives. And I think Ripple has gone deep in understanding the payments problem and how we can address that using these technologies. So let's take a moment to talk about understanding that problem. Some of you also may have noticed as you've been downstairs that there are some airline chairs. Now, some people who work at Ripple thought that those are airline chairs because they're used as a demonstration because our expense policy doesn't allow them to sit in the big seats. They sat down and they grabbed the CFO of Ripple, Ron Will, and like, hey, look, how can I do this? I fly to Kuwait, how can I sit in these seats? That's not the problem we're here to talk about. I often point to the fact that if you wanted to move $10,000 to London today, if you wanted to move $10,000 to Kuwait today, the fastest way to do that is to get a car, drive to SFO, buy a plane ticket, and fly the 14 or 16 hours to Kuwait such that you have the money there. That's a crazy statement. In a world where I can stream video from the space station, literally, I can't move my own value efficiently between networks. So one is slow. The second is, I'm always amazed, Swift has a reported error rate of 6%. Imagine if 6 out of every 100 Google searches you did had a failed result. That's a crazy statement. We have an observer to our board of directors who's the CFO of a Fortune 50 company. He actually said in their experience, they do a lot of cross-border transactions, he said to us that they see an 11% error rate. Now again, this isn't to say that these aren't correctable. So human intervention is required, and it slows things down, obviously has costs associated with that. Most impactful is the trapped liquidity that is inherent in the cross-border, in the correspondent banking network. We've seen estimates from the players like major consulting firms that estimate there's $10 trillion trapped in accounts around the world, enabling the current correspondent banking infrastructure. To the extent we can make that more efficient, we can dramatically change even the economics of many different payment companies, banks, and again, making this more efficient for global commerce, making more capital available to put to work to banks' core mission, not to pre-fund that. Now I think, again, going back to why has Ripple enjoyed some momentum, tailoring the solution, really understanding the solution, make sure it matches the needs of the customer. And if you look at how global payments today, one of the things I have pointed to is companies like Amazon employ a couple hundred engineers, and all they do is they integrate into payment networks around the world. So Amazon today, last time I checked, can only support payouts in 19 different currencies. Amazon is, I think, one of the $2 trillion companies, and yet Amazon, their marketplace, which is a huge piece of their business, they can only pay out in 19 currencies. And that is a hodgepodge of integrations around the world, ranging from India to China to the EU. Now, if you think about the implication of that to more tangibly a business, we have had conversations with other networks, other marketplaces like Uber. Uber knows that if they can pay their drivers more frequently, the retention of their drivers goes up. Uber has a big challenge in that if people join, they become drivers and then they churn out. That means that Uber has to go acquire new drivers. That's not a great thing. Now, some of you probably took a taxi here this morning. When you got out of the taxi, you either paid them in cash or you paid them with a credit card, which frankly would settle in a couple days. In contrast, when you're using Uber, the Uber drivers get paid every 2 weeks. Why is it they get paid every 2 weeks? How can we reduce the friction so every time you get out of an Uber, the Uber driver gets paid? Uber wants that to happen, despite being obviously a major player. The ability, the friction even associated for someone like that is challenging. Our vision is to truly enable global payments such that you can plug in with one API, and whether you're seeking liquidity, whether you're seeking a payment into a payment network, whether you're seeking a payment into a bank, to reduce that friction such that it is real-time and extremely low cost. By doing that, we think we can let RippleNet truly scale to serve a new set of customer demands. On demand and real time. Again, we are all witnessing a generation grow up that are sometimes pejoratively described as millennials. They expect real time. They've grown up with the expectation that this is going to be a real-time experience. They can click on their phone and have ice cream delivered in 30 minutes. I do love ice cream. Let's not criticize that. So we can make them low cost. We can truly get a dramatic reduction in the error rate such that there are not failures, and deliver an elegant experience both to banks and to their customers. Ripple has been fortunate to have some really profound momentum. Many of those reasons are the customers here in the room. As a cross-section, we have announced over 100 customers. These are a handful of names. Again, many of them are in the room, ranging from Sign Commercial, Amex, Santander, certainly Remitter, Instagram, but we couldn't be more proud to be able to show slides like this, and we know that we owe our success to the partnership with all of you in the room. I'll give one specific example of a corridor that we brought live about a year ago, and that's between the immigrants, really targeted for the population in Japan, Thai workers who are in Japan who want to send payments back to Thailand. In partnership with SBI Remit and Cyan Commercial, we brought this corridor, one of the first corridors we brought live, and we've seen dramatic month-over-month growth that has continued because it's solving a real problem for a real customer. And we compare that to some of the hype in the blockchain ecosystem, we think it's served us very effectively. So stepping back, why are we here today? Well, we're here certainly to connect all of you, to spend a couple of days talking about the industry, to bring a lot of powerful speakers up here. But we're also making a couple of announcements about what's going on at Ripple. One is, it has been a tremendous 2018 for Team Ripple. We have had a huge sales year. Just recently we announced PNC joining RippleNet, the National Bank of Kuwait. We announced the National Commercial Bank of Saudi Arabia very recently, and that momentum has continued to build. A very important, powerful part of what we're doing with RippleNet is a network has network effects. The more nodes on the network, the more value there is to join the network. So that has continued to grow. Second, we have continued to grow as a company ourselves. I had a nice opportunity to speak with some of our customers last night at an event over drinks, and one of the things they said is how much they had witnessed Ripple changing from a year ago, that we have grown the team now. We stand about 300 people, about 100% year-over-year growth that has enabled us to sign about 2 production contracts per week. So that has been a very powerful momentum. And I will also pause and say, when I talk about production contracts, I'm not talking about experiments. I'm not talking about proof of concepts. These are production contracts with banks and payment providers and other financial institutions that has continued to grow because we're solving a real problem. But I think one of the things we're also perhaps most excited to announce today is that we are moving xRapid into production. That has been a big step and certainly watched across the industry. I am very impressed with the team at Ripple because this was just an idea about a year ago. We now, and actually I got an email moments ago, that we've now done our first production payments with partnered with Qualix into Mexico, live within the last hour. So this is a major step forward. We're excited to announce the partnership, and certainly, again, recognizing we're only as good as we are solving our customers' problems, but Qualix, MercuryFX, as well as Catalyst and the work we're doing there with xRapid, I think is demonstrating we're solving a real problem, and to the extent we can do that at scale, it can have a dramatic impact for both these customers and many others in the future. But it's certainly important to us that you not just take our word for the work we're doing here, and it's been a real honor to see the participation from many people in this room. You're going to hear from in the coming days. You're going to hear from a logo slide of a whole bunch of different companies you're going to hear from. Some of them are groups you've heard of, some of them perhaps not. But I think it is about learning together. It's about demonstrating that an internet of value can have this profound impact, and by working together we can enable that. This includes obviously regulators, this includes payment providers, and some large global banks. So in summary, I will conclude just by saying I think it is a profound honor to have you all here. As we heard this morning from President Clinton, it truly does take a movement to change the world. When I joined Ripple about 3.5 years ago, somebody in the audience asked me, why is it that I wanted to join Team Ripple? And I quoted, a gentleman who's often quoted in Silicon Valley, Steve Jobs. I think many people in Silicon Valley want to put their little dent in the universe. And I think by working with everyone in this room, we have the opportunity to do that in a pretty profound way. So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you all for participating over the next couple of days. And I look forward to meeting more of you as I'll be around the next couple of days. Look forward to meeting more of you then. Thank you very much.
I want to take it from that sort of big idea, the big notion of what we're doing at Ripple, we're all doing as a community here together today, and really drill down and sort of look at what it might look like in a purely mechanical way, what an app that actually enables these payments using the RippleNet would look like. I'm going to get Vince up here to talk about that in a second, but first I want to check out this video.
because OnePayFX is a low-cost way to send your international transfers to any Eurozone country and the USA in the destination currency. It's easy, fast and clear. Santander OnePayFX. Download it now.
That's real. That's the vision. Ed Metzger, tell us about it.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. My name is Ed Metzger. I'm from Banco Santander. I'm going to tell you about our journey with Ripple and how we've used it to improve our customers' lives. First of all, a few notes of thanks. First of all, thanks to Ripple for asking me to speak today. I'd also like to thank President Clinton for agreeing to be my warm-up act. I think he did an okay job. I think he went away very happy because he fulfilled one of his long-held ambitions, which is to have a photo taken with me. I like to do my bit to spread happiness, so thanks to him. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you about why it is that we think there's an opportunity here and what we've done about that opportunity. So, first of all, before I go into the detail, I'll tell you about what our journey has been. I just a few words on the Santander. So hopefully most of you have heard of us, but for those who haven't, we are the largest bank in the Eurozone. We have a deep presence in over 10 markets, primarily in Europe and Latin America. We are primarily a retail and commercial bank, and that's very important when we think about what OnePayFX is, and I'll come back onto that. The other bit of context is what does Santander stand for? What do we want to be for our customers? So there's a couple of things I just want to call out because they're relevant to our story of OnePayFX. Number one is our brand values are to be simple, personal, and fair with our customers, and that's the standard that we use to judge everything that we do. Second is that we are an international bank, and people look to us to deliver that excellence, and we use that excellence to help our customers prosper. And I think that's very relevant in the sense of people look to us, well, you guys must be good in international payments, okay? And then the third thing I just want to talk about, because it's very relevant to the story, is we believe that financial services will increasingly move to a world of open platforms where companies collaborate to deliver great customer service through open platforms. And that's, I think, informs part of what we're trying to do with OnePayFX. So let's move on to the story. So why OnePayFX? Well, a few years ago, we were talking to our customers, trying to understand what they thought about the service we offered. And what we noticed was a pent-up demand in our customers, especially in regards to international payments. And what was this? Well, there's a level of dissatisfaction with the current service. And what was driving that was that, and I think you just heard about these very same points, is actually what we see is customers, be they retail, be they SME, be they corporates, in their personal lives and their work lives, they're getting used to doing things digitally, they're getting used to doing things fast, and they're getting used to having all the information at their fingertips. And all you have to do is think about how I can send messages to people on the other side of the world instantly, how I can have a two-way communication with those people. I can book a house to stay in on the other side of the world right now and pay for it right now as well. I can call a taxi straight away. Everything is about doing it when you want, how you want, doing it on your phone, the thing that we're all stuck to the whole time. And it's those are the features that people have come to expect from any proposition. And it's fair to say that today's international payments experience sometimes does not meet that high standard. The rising customer expectations is what has propelled us to think, well, what could we do differently? So what did we do? So we started to look at how we could improve our service to match these rising expectations. And in particular, we started to say, well, it's obvious, the world has been changed by technology. So what technologies are there out there that could help us improve the service that we give to our customers for international payments? And that's how we started working with Ripple. We looked at a number of alternatives, and we worked with Ripple. We've been working with Ripple now for sort of the last 2 or 3 years. And what we did with Ripple was we created a number of proof of concepts, pilots, in a couple of our markets, and we were able to prove the hypothesis. The hypothesis was we could address the customer pain points using the Ripple technology as a component. Based on the success of that, of those pilots, in April this year we launched OnePayFX. We launched it in 4 markets simultaneously: the UK, Spain, Brazil, and Poland. And we enabled our customers in those geographies to be able to use a Ripple-based international payment service, which we call OnePayFX. The one I want to focus on is the one that you just saw on the video, which is the app. I think it demonstrates a lot of the customer features that have proved to be so positive since we launched our service in April. When our executive chairwoman, Anna Bertin, launched it, she very much focused on, quite correctly, on what does it do for our customers. And let me just tell you how it works, and then we can start talking about some of the features that sit beneath that. So, very simple, an app, like we have hundreds on our phones. You log in very simply, you select the currency, you say how much you want it to arrive or how much you want to send. The app tells you exactly how much it's going to cost you, how much will arrive, and when it will get there. Done. It's 4 or 5 clicks to do something that in the past would have taken an awful long time. But the other thing is also in terms of the payment experience itself. We are able to move towards instant payments, and that is a really powerful customer proposition. And what we've seen is some great customer feedback from both retail and SME customers. It's always useful, I think, to illustrate these points with some anecdotes. So, previously one of my favourites was one of our very first customers found himself in Italy on holiday, having parked in the wrong place and needing to pay a parking fine, but he didn't have his cards on him. And he was able to use the app there and then to pay his parking fine and stop his hire car being towed away. And I think that just shows you the change in customer behaviour, how you can enable people to replicate, what has become quite standard now in domestic instant clearing is you just do it whenever you need to make a payment. But actually, I have to be honest, I think that's just this very weekend, in fact this morning, there was a better example. So I'm actually moving from London to Madrid in a couple of weeks. I'm taking my whole family, and my wife called me up and said, we're getting a new house, so we have to put a deposit down for the first month's rent. And she called me up and said, amongst all your gallivanting and cocktail parties and your worked drinks in San Francisco, have you put the deposit down? I said, of course I have. Now, that wasn't strictly true, but it's okay because I knew that I could make the payment while I was having my breakfast this morning, and I knew that straight away the estate agent said, thanks for the payment. And I think it's that really shows you the power. Once you know you can define exactly how much will arrive, because I have to send an exact amount, and you know when it's going to arrive and it's going to be fast, it changes customer behaviour, and we're seeing that early signs of that. So people can change the way they don't have to plan ahead. When does this payment have to arrive? No, you do it when you need to do it. And that's really powerful. But I also want to just take a step back and say, well, how do you achieve this result? And I think some of you will be working with Ripple, some of you might not. But the key feature is to achieve these customer benefits. How does the system do it? Well, it's because it's a two-way communication. When you're sending a payment, there's a whole series of backwards and forwards, and it's that which allows you to deliver these customer benefits. But there's another feature, I think, that comes from that two-way communication, and that's, I'm going to return to the topic of open platforms. What we found to build a system where you can move towards instant payments is you obviously need someone to send the payment and someone to take the payment and credit it to the right accounts. And what we've done is we've enabled clearing services over Ripple. Today we have pounds, we will very shortly have euros, and that enables us basically to credit that you can have an experience to over 300 million bank accounts of instant credits. Like, well, give us a couple of seconds, but it's an astonishingly better experience for a customer, especially, for instance, if you have forgotten to put the deposit down on a house and the deadline is today. It can happen straight away, and that's really powerful as a customer experience. And I think that clearing service, we see that as a really powerful feature here, because it's an example of an open financial services platform that others can connect to create that same customer experience with their customers in turn. Conclusion, right? So I think, where are we going next? Well, where we're going to go next is we're going to roll out this service to more customers, more channels, more geographies. We see this as a competitive differentiator for Santander, and something that allows us to get to where the reality of a customer's life matches their expectations of us as Santander. We are, there's a few of us around from Santander here. Do come and ask us about how we found it, and also obviously we are very much open for business to help others achieve the same results and move towards a world where the central brand values are met. And also, I think when we talk to customers, what they really like, what is critical for them is transparency, certainty, and that's transparency about cost, about value, and about when it's going to arrive. And then the icing on the cake, of course, is making it arrive even faster. So that's what I want to tell you about OnePayFX. As I said, do please come and grab us. We'd be delighted to talk to you and work with any of you in the future. Thank you very much.
Cool. Love that. I thought one of the interesting things that President Clinton mentioned this morning, or tweeted out, something that's near and dear to our heart, this idea of regulation and what's happening in the world of regulation as it relates to blockchain, as it relates to what we're doing across the Ripple net. And his quote was something to the effect of, that you can't use the regulations of the past to govern a new technology, that you could kill the golden goose, which Johnson family has really high hopes for golden goose. We don't want that to happen. So what is the future of regulation? What opportunities does it present? We're going to focus on them right now. On Emmanuel, or from our board members, as well as Neil. Would you guys come on up? Talk regulation.
Hello, everyone. I hope you all had a good lunch. We're very excited to have Sunil Sabharwal here to speak to us today, and actually to zoom out a little bit to give you an overview of the global regulatory landscape. Because as all of you who follow this space know, of course, last year there was all this excitement in the world about digital assets, and then immediately after came the concern from regulators. So you saw China ban crypto trading, South Korea and Japan raise concerns, Germany and France calling on the G20 to regulate it, someone from the Bank of International Settlements saying it was digital assets are parasites and Ponzi schemes. So we have Sunil here to sort it all out for us. He's particularly well suited to do so because he has served for the past 2.5 years as the sole U.S. board member to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, responsible for casting the U.S. vote on all IMF decisions. And he took an active role in the IMF's Financial Technology Initiatives and Risk Unit. Previously, he had a long and distinguished career in corporate finance at GE Capital, Western Union, as his own investor, and he is a masterful fencer, so ask him about that later over cocktails. So with no further ado, Sunil, could you tell me a little bit about your role at the IMF, the background, and what kind of work the IMF does in this space?
Thanks for the introduction, Anya. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased and honored to be here. I am no longer at the IMF, and I am no longer within the U.S. Treasury Department, so I'm free to speak my mind. And many people ask me how does one actually get to be the U.S. board member to the IMF, and since we've had President Clinton here before, I'll tell you it's very simple. All you need is one of the presidents, like President Obama, nominate you, and all you need is the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to confirm you. And then finally, when there's an administration change halfway through a term, all you need is that the next president, President Trump, and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said that it's okay for you to say.
Your confirmation was the last moment of bipartisanship.
Following that simple process, when I joined the IMF, actually, it was a really interesting time. This is winding the clock back 2.5 years, Feb 2016, because the IMF had just started on a number of initiatives that are very relevant to today and to this room. It had issued at the time a paper on virtual currencies. I actually came out and issued a paper on virtual currency. It then went on and created a high-level fintech advisory panel, inviting the who is who of the fintech world and crypto world and blockchain world into that. So Ripple was one of them, but Ant Financial was also part of that small group. It then went on and in the 6 months after that, wrote a paper on financial technology and the developments, and addressed a particular issue that was emerging at the time, what was referred to as de-risking. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but de-risking refers to the sudden collapse of correspondent banking relationships around the world. So the large clearing banks from the UK, Canada, US, Germany were shutting down their correspondent banking relationships around the world, leaving many countries with no connectivity into them in terms of sending money in, or maybe with one connectivity. And you could imagine if you're the only player to get money in, what that does to
And why were they shutting down those relationships? Just risk?
Those were related to basically a risk-benefit analysis of those financial institutions, and what had happened is that the cost of doing business in dozens of these countries became very expensive. The regulatory cost, compliance costs, and the corresponding fines or risks associated with that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. On the other hand, there were only, maybe in terms of volume of transactions, not that many. So private sector players made a decision not to continue doing that business. And the IMF was really uniquely situated to address this issue because of a number of things. So everybody has heard of the IMF, but actually not a lot of people understand what it does really. Everybody knows we bail out countries when they go into trouble. Everybody's been seeing the news about Argentina. It's the lender of last resort. But that is actually a smaller piece of the activity of the IMF. A second very large piece is that the IMF actually surveys every country every year, so it is knowledge about the macroeconomic picture of those countries. So when a situation like in Argentina occurs, it's ready to move. The third piece of the IMF activity, and this is relevant to this phase, is the technical assistance, what we refer to as capacity development. And here, when this de-risking motion was happening and the banking relationships were being stopped, the IMF's team actually went into dozens of these countries to train the central banks to improve their own AML CFP compliance, thereby reducing the risk of the international clearing banks to be able to go back in.
Great, thank you. Christine Lagarde, who is your very dynamic leader at the IMF, has said that we need to keep an open mind about blockchain and cryptocurrency assets because of their potential to improve both the global payment system, financial inclusion, foreign aid. You've talked a little bit about the global payment system in terms of correspondent banking, but give me some of the other global use cases that you think are really front of mind here.
Good question. So, at the fund, at the IMF, you hear a lot about big tech and this investment and that, but we always try to identify, first of all, what are the drivers to some of this, and analyzing the drivers of this boom in fintech, so artificial intelligence, cryptography, investment in the spread of mobile internet, and of course blockchain technology, DLT, were some of the drivers that were coming in. And then we try to look at not anecdotal evidence, but real numbers. So how much money is now going in? And if you take a look at, say, from 2010, the amount of investment in financial technology has really boomed. VC investment into fintech in 2010 was less than $1 billion. Now it's $17 billion. So both the drivers and the numbers were coming up. So that for the IMF was then say, okay, so what are now the opportunities to look at that, risks and the opportunities? Maybe on the opportunities side, we talked about remittances, and Brad mentioned remittances and the cost of remittances. So cross-border payments, you talk about business-to-business payments, and that's about $150 trillion. Remittances and generates about $240 billion in revenues. The remittances, so person-to-person payments, mostly by migrants, is about $500-600 billion, and there the 600 billion, and there the cost is 7.5% in terms of what they end up costing the transaction. So, but then if you dig further, what are the costs and what can you address? In a remittance transaction, the four key costs are, of course, compliance. In IMF analysis, it's about 15%. The FX, that's again round number, about 15%. The actual back office operations is about 40%, and then the funds, the captured funds, is also about 30%. So that's about 100%. So you could see that with DLT, you could actually almost address every single one of these, and you can see how that 7.5% could actually come down significantly. Exactly. So that would be one use case clearly, and of course, this one is and Ripple itself is in the forefront of changing the dynamic there. The other example, let me give you two more examples that are relevant. Combating fraud and corruption also in payments could also be addressed with some of these new technologies. We, together with a few financial partners, actually it was an initiative led by Citigroup. They called it T4I Technology for Integrity, and that was a global contest with public sector, private sector partners asking for firms, not just startup firms, but large firms to come up with initiatives that, with the use of new technology, including blockchain, address fraud and corruption, and that culminated in a dozen firms coming to the IMF, all of whom then have received contracts, whether it's with IBM or Citi or PwC, so actually the ideas they had are not actually put into business. So I'd say that's a very good example. And the third, actually one of my favorite examples is and it's to be tested, is the application of DLT for foreign aid. Foreign aid is massive and is massively inefficient. So about 30%.
Corrupt. What do you actually mean by leakage?
So what I mean is probably about 30% of goes missing. Intermediation, fraud, friction, loss. You add all that up, and the problem is that you actually don't know where it goes missing. So once again, if you were to be able to track a U.S. aid program of, let's say, $50 million to 5,000 farmers in Afghanistan, how much of that 50 today is getting there? You probably don't want to really know the number, but you don't even know where it's gone. So that is an application. I think that there are some pilots are beginning on that, but another area which I think is a significant opportunity.
Absolutely. During my time at the State Department, this was a constant source of frustration, is that you would give these enormous sums of aid and very little was ending up on the floor. Those are three very important use cases, and of course, xRapid is working on one of them. Let me switch topics slightly to cyber. We've heard a lot about cyber intrusions of cryptocurrency exchanges. They've been a big problem. And I know you worked on some of these issues at the IMF. How would you go about mitigating these risks?
So, cyber. So, one of my favorite persons is Christina Lagarde, the MD at the fund. And when she talks about the opportunities related to blockchain and fintech in general, she, of course, identifies the very real issue of cyber risk. And again, I refer to some research that the IMF has done, and some way of trying to forecast what it actually means. And in certain scenarios, I think the profitability of the global banking sector is about $900 billion trillion. But under certain scenarios, 9% of that could be lost to fraud, which is really significant and could be very systemic risk. So here, the challenge is global cooperation. So first of all, the countries need to cooperate with each other, the big countries, and you have some geopolitical issues there, having same countries in the room and sharing their approach to cyber. And
as it relates to cryptocurrency.
As it exactly.
Yeah.
But both, because certain countries are spying on others, and then you're not going to sit in the same room to discuss how you're trying to catch that. And the other one is, of course, training. So I talked about the EML training the IMF staff has done. So the IMF is now doing training on cyber. Many central banks don't have even the basics in place for that. And again, we're just trying to increase the level of awareness. So I think that's the first step there.
Thank you very much. Let me bring us back to the regulatory side of the house. And I talked about how there was this huge euphoria about digital assets, and then the terror, because if you've worked for a government as I have and as you have, one of the things that determines your sovereignty is your own currency. And so I think countries are all struggling with how do we regulate the space. And I know from my time at Ripple that we've been going around for years essentially begging people to regulate us and to regulate this space sensibly. Give me an overview of who in the world you think is getting it right and what you think the right balance should be.
So, first of all, I think we have to think of what are the principles of regulations here, and are all the countries abiding by it? So, the world's really set up to regulate on the basis of entities as opposed to activities. So that's the first mind shift regulators need to have, that it's not entities who are doing all kinds of things, but activities that you want to regulate. Secondly, proportionality of regulation is really important. You have seen sometimes exorbitant amount of fines, I would say, in certain cases, maybe not a corresponding level of crime, I would say. So proportionality is very important.
And you're seeing that in the cryptocurrency space?
You see that related to anti-money laundering,
Okay.
yes. And not safeguarding. Now, they could be related to a cryptocurrency transaction or not, but you've actually seen that. The international coordination on this is very important as a third, and fourth, which the regulators have been doing, is of course these regulatory sandboxes. You asked about where I think they're getting right. So there'll actually be a lot of discussion on this tomorrow, and I don't want to take the thunder from tomorrow's session. But so Asia, of course, hit it out of the block, and is doing very well. Everybody talks about Singapore and Thailand. We'll hear about tomorrow. The Saudis and the Emirates are doing interesting things. But I would say the two that I like are one is actually brand new and very boldly called the Blockchain Act by Liechtenstein. I don't know how many people know where Liechtenstein is. It's kind of tiny country. It's well known that it has a lot more registered companies than inhabitants, so similar to Delaware in that sense. And so what's very important that they're a member of the EEA, the European Economic Area, but not the EU. So the EU has 23,000 pieces of legislation, so only about 5,000 of that apply to Liechtenstein or Switzerland, which enables them to move relatively faster compared to their EU counterparts. And Liechtenstein has taken a bold move. They've drafted the legislation in the spring. It's basically going through consultation. It'll become law. I think November is the deadline, and it's for a tokenized economy. I understand that for ICOs, it's becoming the next destination. And clearly, they're trying to bring business there. So they're going to treat it as a normal commercial transaction, tokens. So I would say watch that space. It's really interesting.
And from what little I understand about it, when you and I talked about it earlier, is it doesn't have this arbitrary distinction that you're seeing in the U.S. between what's a currency and what's a security, and trying to fit this space into basically a Supreme Court case from the 1930s.
Correct.
Instead, they just created a new category, and they said there needs to be transparency around this space and protections for investors.
Absolutely, and it's brand new legislation, and it's not just a spur of the moment idea. They've been working on it quietly for 2 years. So, and because they have such a sophisticated financial, regulatory, soft and hard infrastructure, they've actually had the wherewithal. So, and the other country, of course, that's done very well here is Switzerland. And if you guys have Zug, the town of Zug is now called Crypto Valley. You thought it was the end of the Swiss bank, or well, Switzerland here rises from the ashes with crypto, and really is taking the lead.
And can you just explain a little bit what it is about Zug that makes it so special? Like, what are the regulations that make it easier there?
So Zug is a canton, is the capital canton that has created special incentives to come and move in there, and made it easier for crypto and blockchain currencies to set up. So just so within the federal state of Switzerland, they've created easier ways of entering. One of the things that firms complain about, startup firms and crypto firms, that they don't get the time with regulators. So it takes them months and months. So both in Liechtenstein and Switzerland, in Zug, you can get on it and very quickly be in a meeting with a regulator, get the right kind of guidance. Now, they're not a free-for-all, so they'll have their minimum capital requirements. So in Liechtenstein, it's 100,000 euro. They'll do their due diligence. Your prospectus needs to describe the asset, the underlying asset, or the value of the token. So they're trying to do it as properly as an IPO for an ICO. And so those would be the two that come to my mind. Here, the UK has done a good one. One thought that maybe taking a geopolitical view here, the UK is probably, I was in London 10 days ago, it looks like there'll be a relatively hard Brexit in terms of financial services, which means that the UK will have to look for partnerships around the world outside of the EU, at least in step one. And I also get a little sense that both the EU and the UK are assigned to that in step one, in certain aspects such as financial services, there'll just be a breakage before a rebuild. And of course, politics can change in 5 minutes, but that's the sense I got in 10 days. So now here in the US, we haven't done the regulatory sandbox, although the Treasury's report that was published just a few months back calls for it, and it's a bold move. That has a very good recommendation. But one complication, of course, we have is that the state regulators, we've got 50 of them, they don't necessarily like to collaborate or take the instructions from Washington. But you could see a scenario where the UK is looking for partners, and California, as a state, could create a regulatory sandbox cooperation. The two economies are similar in size. Within a state, it's easier to manage because the sandboxes need to move out of their little corners and really, as a first step, test domestically, but then really go international. And you could actually think of a very interesting California, UK sandbox corridor on blockchain or crypto. So you have to think out of the box, and I see that coming from the UK because they'll have to. And if we in the United States are not able to get something on the national level, then maybe a state, certainly like California, is able to do that.
Right. It's an interesting idea because you could imagine it in certain things like where do you set up ICOs and companies in this space. But of course, the big issue is anti-money laundering, know your customer, how the SEC regulates things. Those are all national. We're in a really unique space here because if you go back to the origins of the internet, of course it came through DARPA and through several well-respected US universities, and in a way, we adopted a multi-stakeholder approach, but the US dominated the conversation about how to regulate the internet. And here, we're just not. There's a huge amount of innovation here in the US, but I think our regulators have been a little bit slow off the mark. And so, a huge amount of innovation in China and elsewhere. And so you see Liechtenstein leading the way, which would have been unheard of with the internet.
Yeah, if you think of the start of the internet and DARPA, it was a US government-led effort that then became privatized, so to speak, in the mid-90s. But then that really set the ground for this next generation of US companies' leadership, which really translated into continued US dominance as in the world economy. So now you have a situation where actually you don't have this kind of focused leadership on one hand. On the other hand, you do have a very innovative and countries such as China, which is now on a PPP adjusted basis, the economies are pretty comparable. So first of all, we're not doing as much. Others are doing a lot more. So that's why I think the Treasury's call for action now is actually really welcome, and I congratulate the Secretary for coming out with that paper.
It's time. Yes. Let me ask you one other important thing, because you work with central bankers all around the world. There has been a lot of talk about central bank issued digital currencies. And to those of us former government officials, we think, Venezuela, good luck. You have hyperinflation with your real currency. I don't know how your digital currency is going to be any better. But you also feel a little bit worried because, in a way, the U.S. and the West, the U.S. and Europe, have been so powerful at imposing sanctions on places like Iran and North Korea because we control the world payments and banking systems. And so many of those sanctions are enforced by companies having to say, well, if I want access to the US financial system, I'm going to stop doing business with Iran. And as you see this move towards sovereign issued digital currency, central banks getting into the act, do you worry about what happens to sanction regimes, or are you optimistic about it?
So CBDC, central bank digital currencies, has been a fairly hot topic of late, and clearly the IMF is looking at it very carefully. Now, so just to be clear, we're not talking about a country issuing a new currency. We're talking about country X issuing its own fiat currency in digital form. So it has to represent all aspects of money. It's a unit of exchange, it's a store of value. So, but in certain countries, it could actually be much cheaper, more efficient, more transparent to issue some of these currencies. Now, you mentioned a couple of examples like Venezuela and Zimbabwe, where some people would actually rather hold a cryptocurrency issue than their own, and there are certain cases where I think it's natural that you see that evolving. Unfortunately, we see some other not so nice cases where certain firms go and offer to certain island states virtual or cryptocurrencies where the business model is, well, I'll issue your currency and I'll take 30% of it on day one, and good luck, Mr. Country. And we have to be really careful of that because that ultimately it's going to end up really sadly for the people in those countries. They're going to have a piece of something that's not going to be worth much.
Well, thank you very much for being with us and for giving us the global overview of this space. We appreciate it. Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you so much.